You're wrong about yourself. Not a little wrong. Completely fundamentally wrong. And the strange part? The version of you that's wrong. That's the only version you've ever met. Let me show you something. Every single atom in your body, every last one, was somewhere else 7 years ago. The carbon sitting in your bones right now, it was CO2 drifting through the atmosphere. The iron pumping through your blood, dissolved in ocean water. You didn't just eat food and grow. You literally replaced yourself, atom by atom, quietly, without asking permission. So point to yourself. Go ahead. Point to you. What are you pointing at? Because it isn't the atoms. They left. It isn't the molecules. They rearranged. So when you say I, when you say it with that complete, unquestioned confidence, what exactly is doing the saying? Don't answer that yet. Just sit with it for a second. Because most people never do. People think the Ship of Theseus is a philosophy puzzle. It isn't. It's a biology fact that we dressed up in Greek clothing to make it feel optional. Here's the actual data. Your red blood cells die every 120 days. Your gut lining, that whole surface, replaces itself every 5 days. 5 days. Your skeleton, which feels like the most permanent thing about you, solid and structural, is completely rebuilt roughly every decade. Even your neurons, which stick around longer than most, constantly rewire. New synapses form. Old ones prune. The map changes even when the territory looks the same. So the Greeks asked, if you replace every plank in a ship, is it still the same ship? And nature just answered. The answer is, there was never a fixed ship to begin with. The thing that feels continuous isn't the material. It's the pattern the material is organized into. But here's where it gets genuinely uncomfortable. Because now you have to ask the sharper question, is a pattern enough? Is a pattern a shape that information takes as it flows through changing hardware? Is that enough to count as a self? Is that enough to be you? I think most people feel the answer should be yes, but feeling it isn't knowing it. And the more you look, the shakier the yes becomes. Your brain is lying to you, not maliciously. It doesn't have motives, but it is constantly and fluently constructing a story and presenting that story to you as reality after the fact with no indication that it did any of that. Here's the experiment that should have broken the internet and somehow didn't. Benjamin Libet, back in the 1980s, hooked people up to electrodes and asked them to flick their wrist whenever they felt like it, and to note exactly when they felt the urge to move. The brain showed electrical activity preparing for the movement about half a second before the person reported feeling the conscious intention to move. Half a second. That's enormous, neurologically. The decision was already in motion. The feeling of deciding came after, which means the voice in your head that says, I chose this, that voice is a narrator. And the narrator arrived after the scene was already filmed. Think about that for a second. We're completely comfortable saying a computer ran a program. We don't ask which transistor made the call. We understand it's a system, distributed, mechanical, no ghost required. But then we turn to the brain and suddenly we point inward and say, that's the real me. There's someone in here making choices, authoring this life. Why? Because it feels that way. Because the experience is so vivid, so immediate, so obviously centered on something that we take the feeling as proof. But feeling isn't knowing. Feeling is just another thing the brain produces. And the brain, as we've established, doesn't always show its work. Okay, so strip it all down. What's actually left? What you are, as best we can tell, and I want to be honest about that qualifier, is a pattern of information, a continuously running set of memories, preferences, predictions, and reflexes implemented on biological hardware that keeps quietly replacing itself underneath you. You are less like an object and more like a flame. Think about a candle flame. What is the flame? It's not a thing, it's an event. The matter passing through it is constantly changing. The molecules that were burning a second ago are gone. New ones arrive. The flame persists, not because the same stuff stays, but because the process continues in the same form. That's closer to what you are. An event that's been running for decades, a pattern persistent enough to feel like a noun when it's actually a verb. But even that gets complicated when you push it because the pattern drifts too. You at 8 years old, same body roughly, different beliefs, different fears, different memories, different values. You've had ideas that rewired you. Relationships that changed what you find funny, what you find unbearable, what you want from a Tuesday afternoon. The pattern that was you 20 years ago is not the pattern that is you now. So which version of the pattern is you? The one running now? The average over time? The one that feels most like your real self, whatever that means. I'll give you the honest answer, we don't have one. We have a useful approximation. Like temperature, temperature is a perfectly useful concept until you get to the edge cases, and then it starts behaving strangely, and you realize it was always a simplification. The self is like that. Works fine for most purposes. Breaks down when you push it. Now here's the part nobody really wants to look at directly. Everything I've described so far, the atom replacement, the pattern drift, the neural processes firing before you're aware, all of that is hard science, measurable, repeatable. We can point to the data. It's unsettling, but it's tractable. We know the shape of what we don't know. But there's a different question underneath all of it. And this one is something else entirely. Why does any of this feel like anything? You can map every neuron. You can trace every signal. You can describe the electrochemical cascade from sensation to processing to motor response in extraordinary detail. And then there's this other fact, this brute, stubborn, impossible to explain fact, that it feels like something to be you. There's an experience happening right now. You're not just processing this information, you're experiencing it. Something it is like to sit here, to hear these words, to have the particular texture of your own consciousness running in the background of everything. Philosophers call this qualia. Scientists call it the hard problem of consciousness. What I call it is the place where our best explanations simply stop. We have no theory, not even a serious candidate for a theory, for why matter arranged in the particular way that brains are arranged produces subjective experience. Why isn't it all just dark processing, mechanical and empty with no inner light? We don't know. We don't know how to know. We're not even sure we're asking the question correctly. And I'll tell you something. I find it genuinely suspicious when people wave this away. When they say, well, consciousness is just a byproduct, just what complexity feels like from the inside. That's not an answer. That's the question restated with more confidence. Real scientific honesty means sitting with the gap, saying plainly, here is where understanding ends and mystery begins. I don't know why it feels like something to be you. Isn't that something? Now you might think all of this is heading somewhere bleak. You might be waiting for me to say, see, you're not real. The self is an illusion. Nothing matters. That's not where this goes. That's actually the cheap version of the conclusion, and it's wrong. Think about what we actually found. You are a pattern, not a fixed object, but a pattern. And patterns, unlike objects, are genuinely changeable. The identity you've been carrying around, the personality you think is just how you are, the fear that feels permanent, the habit that feels inevitable, none of that is carved into stone. It's running on plastic hardware. Plastic in the literal sense, neuroplasticity, the brain's documented capacity to rewire itself based on experience, attention, repetition. You changed before, drastically. You will change again. The only question is whether the change happens to you or because of you. And here's the move I think is actually worth making. When physicists really understood the atom, when they cracked it open and saw what was actually in there, they didn't become nihilists. They didn't say, oh, it's all just particles, nothing is solid, nothing is real. They became more careful, more precise, more respectful of what was actually there rather than what they assumed was there. Understanding that the self is constructed doesn't make it fake. It makes it available. It means you can work with it. The version of you sitting here right now isn't the final version by necessity. It's the current version by momentum. Those are very different things. You're not discovering that you don't exist. You're discovering that what exists is stranger and more flexible and more interesting than the story you were handed about yourself. Every morning you wake up and there it is again. The same voice, the same name, the same rough shape of preferences and fears and inside jokes you have with yourself. And that continuity is real. I'm not saying it isn't. It's just not what you thought it was. It's not a soul substance. It's not a persistent kernel of selfhood that travels through time unchanged like a bead on a string. It's a story, a very good story, told in real time, updated constantly, fast enough and consistent enough to feel unbroken. The brain is a prediction machine that got complicated enough to predict itself. And somewhere in that process, in that extraordinary, recursive, inexplicable loop, something started experiencing things. Something started asking questions. Something started pointing at itself and saying, you are the universe building a model of itself, asking questions about itself, being confused and curious about what's doing the asking. The atoms in you don't know they're you. They're just doing what atoms do, following the rules of physics, forming bonds, carrying charges. There's nothing in the physics that says, and this particular arrangement will wonder why it exists. But here you are, wondering. The matter doesn't know. The pattern does, sort of, imperfectly, in the only way anything in the universe ever has. And how does matter become wondering? We genuinely, honestly, with all our neuroscience and physics and philosophy, cannot tell you. The most studied object in the universe is the one you've been looking out from your entire life, and it remains, at its core, mysterious. That's not a failure. That's the actual situation. And I think you can do two things with it. You can find it unsettling, which is reasonable, or you can find it the single most astonishing fact you've ever been handed. I know which one I'd pick. The question isn't closed. It's just getting interesting